Hey guys, this will be our final lecture on how budgetary policy can sustain domestic economic stability. We're going to look at how budgetary policy can affect the goal of full employment. Now, we're going to assume that full employment has not been achieved and that there is, at the moment, cyclical unemployment. We're going to see how the budget tackles this issue of cyclical unemployment. Now, as we know, cyclical unemployment occurs at a time of economic downswing. So we have the business cycle, we have GDP, and we have time. We have a cycle which operates in a wave-like fashion, and we also have an upward sloping trend line. So at the moment, we are experiencing an economic downturn, an economic downswing, and we're around here. We're approaching a trough. So what happens at this moment is this period is characterized by high unemployment, low inflation, and very weak growth. So as we know, part of the circular flow, employment leads to income, leads back to production, leads back to demand for labor, and it leads back to employment. So that's part of the circular flow model, and that was a very brief circular flow model. Just keep that in mind. Okay. So in times of economic downswing, we're going to see how budgetary, automatic stabilizers, and discretionary stabilizers can affect both cyclical unemployment and even in times of economic upswing, how budgetary policy can affect what is known as structural or natural unemployment. Okay, so we're going to focus on cyclical unemployment during economic downswing first of all. So one, cyclical unemployment. So we know that there are two components to the budget. We have automatic stabilizers and we have discretionary stabilizers. And automatic stabilizers being tax rates and transfer payments. So what happens during times of economic downswing is that there are low rates of growth. And in times of low rates of growth, businesses have less incentive to hire people. And thus the source of cyclical unemployment is due to low aggregate demand. And as we know, we talked about in many lectures, aggregate demand is C plus I plus G plus net exports, which can be broken down as X minus M. So when there is low aggregate demand, we can see that consumption spending is low, possibly due to low confidence, and also our investment spending is low because businesses have less incentive to spend. So overall, aggregate demand here has gone down. So how does the government encourage spending? Well, firstly, they could use automatic measures. So automatic measures encourage consumption through transfer payments, as well as a decrease in taxation, which would then increase disposable income. So these automatic measures, because of income, have decreased, therefore people have moved back tax brackets and therefore have a lower portion of their income to pay as tax. So what the automatic stabilizers do is that they automatically or naturally increase aggregate demand back to a sufficient level in order to achieve full employment. If this does not work, they could use option 2 and use what is known as discretionary stabilizers. Discretionary stabilizers. So what they do here is that they're going to use government policy, so G1 and G2 spending, and they're going to encourage or stimulate economic growth. They could either increase investment spending by firms, they can encourage consumption by households by implementing or giving out stimulus packages like they did during the GFC. So this would all act to increase aggregate demand, and since we know that in the short term businesses respond to householders' demand, and as aggregate demand increases, therefore production would increase, and so cyclical unemployment would decrease. So that's how the government uses budgetary policy to affect this idea of cyclical unemployment. So we're going to look at how they could also use discretionary stabilizers to decrease natural unemployment. And in many cases, natural unemployment or structural unemployment is a source of inefficiency built into the labour force. And although the government recognises that sometimes natural unemployment must occur because of this improvement in technologies, it is also good to lower natural unemployment to make it as small as possible. So what the government can do is to use discretionary stabilizers to improve the skill. So improve skill of the labour force. And this generally affects, this generally relates to, say, for example, this policy on school leavers. So they made it compulsory that you couldn't leave the school before the age of 16. So 16 and over, well, actually, younger than 16 could not leave school. Let's just call that. Younger than 16 cannot leave school. And so those people who would have entered the labour force, and although ostensibly this may seem that the government is actually lowering the labour force or decreasing the number of people in the labour force, it in fact has an incentive, a long-term incentive, to improve the skill and quality of our labour force. And since we know that natural unemployment is when there is a mismatch between the skills of the workers and the demands of the job, when people develop newer and better skills, that could actually decrease the rate of natural unemployment in the long term. So that's the relationship between budgetary policy and full employment, is that budgetary policy could use both automatic and discretionary stabilizers in order to stimulate aggregate demand so as to reduce this idea of cyclical unemployment due to a low AD. And it could also use discretionary measures such as school leavers policies to decrease the rate of natural unemployment by improving the skills of our workers.